Hello and welcome to At the Leadership Table with retired Major General Jim Hoyer. Oftentimes people hear the word leader and they think only of political leaders, but leaders come in many forms, and that's worth exploring. I'm Jim Hoyer, born and raised in West Virginia, a husband, a father, a new grandfather, and a retired military leader, serving for over 40 years in public leadership for our state and nation. Now, the most important mission I have going forward is to educate, motivate, and empower our next generation of leaders. At the leadership table with me today is CJ Harvey. And CJ was the press secretary and director of communications for Governor Jim Justice, and now is serving as vice president for communications and marketing at my alma mater, the University of Charleston. Wanted to have CJ on for a while because CJ is one of those young West Virginia leaders who is out there telling West Virginia's story and telling the positive and the great things that are going on in West Virginia, both when he was press secretary for Governor Justice, but also as a podcaster and media person himself, and now in his role with the University of Charleston. So CJ, it's great to have you on.
Yeah, General Hoyer, thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure. Great to see you again, as always. And happy to be talking about all of the amazing things that's going on in my life, but just talking about West Virginia, as always.
So, CJ, I'm going to start out by asking you the same first question we ask all of our guests, and that is, please share with us a standout moment when you learned something really important about leadership.
Yeah, that's it's a great question because in my life, I think that my time in the Justice Administration every single day felt like a standout moment. There was always something that you were learning about leadership. And so I would hate to, I can't really pick out a single particular moment or event, but it was really just watching the governor go about his daily business and watching him really take control of certain situations and be the biggest leader in the room. And because it was always a top down effort, it was always the mood of the governor that set the tone for whatever you were going off of. There's that great quote that leadership is not about being in charge, it's about taking care of those in your charge. Simon Sinek, and I felt like the governor certainly lived up to that, and so that's kind of one of those quotes that's stuck with me and that I feel like I live by, because the governor, while he was a great leader, he always knew when to take care of his people. And if anything, that was probably the biggest takeaway. It's not just about being the boss in the room, but it's about how can you inspire others to get the best out of them that will make you a better leader in yourself. And so I think that was probably really my entire time in the Justice Administration was a standout moment. I feel like I could write a book about the times, but really just taking care of others around you that you are charged with being in charge of is probably the greatest quality that I tried to pick up from the governor.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example. And so tell us a little bit more from a leadership management standpoint, what it was like in that fast-paced environment, because you were always on the road, you were always working in the issue, you were still managing the comms for COVID response, pandemic response. Tell us about how, from a leadership standpoint, you manage that fast pace.
Yeah, definitely. So, you know, we were on the road a lot. Really, I don't know if it was the governor just got well, you were with the governor so much during COVID that I'm sure he just got a little stir crazy. And maybe you even saw it, he was basically locked in, in his house for or at the Capitol for all of those months during the pandemic. And then, when it was finally time to break free and get out of the house a little bit, I think he was like, all right, we're gonna drive every day. We're going all over the place. He has that story about putting 1,000,000 miles on his car. Now, we've always wondered if we could actually calculate whether he hit 1,000,000 miles on that car or not, because that is a lot of miles every
Wow.
single day. So, but not the point, regardless. But the governor liked to get out. And so, how did we manage all of that? that it was, a lot of you being on your phone. You were always on a phone call or texting or emailing. But I think my favorite takeaway from being in that environment is that you always knew that you're really going to help somebody. We live in this divisive time right now, certainly politically, but there wasn't anything that we did in the governor's office that didn't always have a recipient of some kind of positivity, right? We were always going somewhere to, and people would laugh and say, "Oh, the governor just likes to give out big checks and take his dog with him," but Baby Dog was an inspiring figure. People love to see Baby Dog. And these checks, yeah, there was a lot of money and funds and grant funds that the governor was able to give out because of the great time, that West Virginia was in economically. But that was never for him. That wasn't for me or for you. That was geared towards somebody else. That was really bringing some positivity to a group, a town, a community, whatever the case is. So, at the individual level, the governor gave out tons of not tons, but several distinguished West Virginians. At the community level, you think about projects like the Grant Street Bridge in Bluefield that connected a community that had been separated for years. And, to get to the homes on the one side, you had to drive 45 minutes to cross another bridge. But this Grant Street Bridge in downtown Bluefield reunited this community. And so the governor helped do that, right? And then even at a larger scale to the people of West Virginia, whether it's tax cuts or bringing jobs or really just inspiring the population again, there was always a recipient of some positivity that the governor had. And so while we were always on the road and there was always something that we were, trying to deal with and manage, what I truly loved most is that, again, you were always doing something for somebody else. Somebody else was going to be receiving some kind of positive outcome on the other end of your work. And that was, how could you hate that, right? How could you loved every second of it.
Right. Yeah, and I think you've given a great example of how you got to experience servant leadership. You got to be a part of serving other people in a leadership role, and that's sometimes it's hard to explain to people, but that's that's something that really gives you some motivation and a charge to be able to do that and see how
Yeah.
people's lives are changed.
Yeah. Well, and then just a quick point on that. We watched you too, General Hoyer, right? We watched you and Dr. Marsh and the governor and all of the other the characters of the COVID briefings, if you will. But
That's a great term
we
for all of here.
it was kind of like a TV show with just different cast of characters. Everybody had a different story, but I think a lot of it. I was very fortunate to come in, like I said, at 2022, right on the heels of the pandemic. But I felt very ready for it because of watching people like you every single day, right? You guys had this aura of leadership that you and really just strength and unity that you guys presented every single day. That was really, people loved it. It was infectious in a good way, not in a in a bad way. That's not the right term for the pandemic, but you guys really presented yourselves as these great leaders of West Virginia, and that rubbed off on a lot of people. So, kudos to you too for inspiring West Virginians during that difficult time. But I felt even those moments prepared me, whether I even knew it or not, for my time in the Justice Administration.
So the other thing I think from my perspective of watching you, seeing from a servant leadership standpoint is you've used your media and marketing skills to be a podcaster also. You guys did the Mountaineer Media piece, and in that you specifically focused on highlighting the positive things about West Virginia, but also people who are making a difference in other people's lives. So tell us a little bit about what got you motivated to get into that and do that.
Yeah, no, another great question, and I love talking about this moment because the Mountaineer Media podcast was born from the pandemic. It was a pandemic side effect, if you will, because for all of that time that we were really kind of trapped in our own worlds, it felt like, nobody knew what the future was going to look like, and really we were just looking for some brevity from the negativity. And that was the true inspiration of the Mountaineer Media podcast was, okay, what's something that a friend and I, Cooper Simmerman, who I worked well with, for the 5 years that we did the podcast, we're college roommates, high school buddies, teammates. That was a guy that I just knew that, we just bounced off of each other so well. And so we said, you know what, shoot, let's start something. Let's start a podcast. We both love talking. What's our niche? What do we focus on? Well, we love West Virginia. Okay, is this an interview thing? Yeah. Well, maybe we interview people about the great things, and turned into telling positive stories about influential, well-known, or just really driven West Virginians. And so this happened really in May of 2020, and then June 2020 we kicked it off, and then for 5 years, really 4.5 years, we celebrated what it meant to be a mountaineer in a variety of ways. And so why we did that, there was a need. There was a need to fill a void of a lot of negativity, and insert a lot of positivity. And it wasn't just at the national scale, it was in the state scale too. Not a lot of people it was kind of right at the beginning of a lot of people talking about the good things in West Virginia. It had almost felt like all of the West Virginians just got fed up right at about the same time. And I don't know if it was the pandemic or whatever it was, but everybody kind of got fed up of like, you know what, I'm done getting beat up here. It's ready to start, defending myself and talking about all the great things about West Virginia. And so that's kind of just what happened. And so here in 2025, while the Mountaineer Media Podcast is officially, we close that chapter, it's kind of behind us. It is really great to see that so many people now are continuing to tell positive stories about West Virginia. This podcast, namely, this platform of yours, namely being another one. And you're doing a phenomenal job, and I appreciate just being on here. But I'm happy to see that West Virginia is telling its story in a more positive way than it ever has before, and I think it's working.
Yeah, you guys set a trend and started a movement, and I think that's a great thing. And you mentioned you and Cooper, and you talked about uh, roommates, teammates. So tell us a little bit about growing up, and give us a little bit of your background growing up.
Yeah, great. Another great question. And I'm pretty much born and bred in West Virginia. I grew up in Charleston for the most part. Went to school all throughout, in Kanawha County. Went to Capitol High School. Ended up at WVU and graduated from WVU. And really, that was, I think, as a young kid, I did not realize what it meant to be from West Virginia. I remember this moment where my mom was telling me about, I was a kid, in the back seat. She's like, it doesn't matter where you go in life. Just remember to end up back here in West Virginia. And I thought back then, I was like, what's so great about West Virginia? Like, this place sucks, excuse my language, but what is so great about West Virginia? And it really wasn't until I got to high school that I recognized just the love that people should have for West Virginia from being from West Virginia. And, I think in high school, that's when you really start making those deeper connections in your late teens. And so it kind of dawned on me, I don't even know when it was, but you're going to end up being somebody's first impression of West Virginia. Somebody's going to meet you and say, you're the first person from West Virginia that I've ever met. And you are what they think of as West Virginia, right? You were the only real true connection that wasn't on their phone or meme or something goofy or a stereotype. That you were the first real tangible physical connection that they have to the state of West Virginia. And if you don't represent well, then you're doing a disservice to all 1.7 million people that are living in that state, or however many consider themselves mountaineers or West Virginians. So that's kind of when it hit me growing up, my late teens. It was like, oh man, I do love this place. I love the people, and I love repping West Virginia. And I love being that first impression of West Virginia for so many people, because ultimately you're going to get the like, oh wow, I never would have thought West Virginia was like that. And after you get that a couple times, you're like, I think I've got it figured out. I love telling this story.
Yep. And again, my opinion, you've done it. You've done it well and continue to do it well. You're now at the University of Charleston. Tell our listeners a little bit about your role at the university and your future plans going forward.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on campus. Let me know when you want to tour again. I'm sure that we're finishing some new construction in Gorman Hall. It's going to be a rehabilitative science and therapy, rehab therapy weighing with PT and OT. And so anytime you want to come down, let me and President Roth know. We'll give you another tour. I don't know when the last time you were on campus was, but we'll snap some pics and make you look good. But yeah, no doubt. And so, yeah, in my previous role in the Justice Administration, I felt like I was really telling the West Virginia story at the highest level, right? It wasn't so much about the granular, detailed level. It was really like telling the world about West Virginia's story. Mountaineer Media felt very granular. It felt very in the weeds. We were telling small, specific, detailed stories, kind of like throwing darts, right? You're going for the bullseyes kind of deal. It's very fine. Compared to the what we were doing in the governor's office. And now it feels like I'm kind of in the middle of both of those at the University of Charleston. So, we're telling UC's story, but UC is not just targeting students in Charleston or Kanawha County. It's targeting students in West Virginia, but it's also targeting students locally, regionally, domestically across the United States. Globally, I mean, we have one of the largest per capita rate of international students compared to any of the universities in the state and really regionally. So we're kind of trying to connect with multiple audiences, not just here in West Virginia, but globally. So there's a lot of different lessons that I'm trying to pick up on of how to do that and how to help recruit students. What do students in other countries want to know about Charleston and West Virginia that's going to ultimately attract them to come here? So it's been not a learning curve, but it's been fun to try and dig into the what marketing materials are needed to help bring people who have never heard from West Virginia but aren't even from the United States to West Virginia. So that's been fun. But really what I want to try and accomplish is, we all know that UC really does play a pivotal part in Charleston's story. And I think President Roth kind of coined that phrase a couple of years ago of Charleston's University. And I think really just leaning into that over the next couple of years is really going to be a large goal of mine because, in West Virginia, you think about a couple of locations, Morgantown, and you immediately associate WVU. You think about Huntington, you immediately associate Marshall, right? Well, when you think about Charleston, I don't think UC is what comes to top of mind in terms of higher learning or higher education. And so I want to continue to build those relationships and market the University of Charleston, again, as Charleston's university. So when you think about higher education in Charleston, you immediately think about the University of Charleston. And one quick example is what we just did over the weekend. We announced the University of Charleston Marathon is coming in 2026. And so for the first time, and so for the first time in 30 years, a marathon will take place in Charleston. And so we're happy to partner with the city of Charleston, Mayor Goodwin, and Tim Brady at the Charleston CVB to kind of bring that to life. And so that's kind of one of those partnerships that hopefully you see more and more of out of the University of Charleston that are popping up with the CVB and with the city, kind of really ingraining ourselves a little bit more because Charleston as a city is doing so well right now. We love to see that it's growing and it's successful. And so tying our name to that in the higher learning section, is kind of what we're trying to do. And as, that's just continuing to build that brand identity and connect with the city.
And if you think about it, and you're really getting the opportunity to use higher education to build economic development and opportunity in West Virginia. So a great opportunity for you there. I want to go back to your podcast days for a bit. So did you have or did you and Cooper have one or two favorite podcast or a favorite time during that 4.5 year period that really stuck out for you?
Yeah, no, that's a great, beautiful question because we interviewed nearly 150 people, and over the course of 5 years, 4.5 years, you're thinking, well, that's really not that many, but because we were doing it weekly for a while, and then we kind of went bi-weekly, and and ended up again hitting that 150 mark. But we really enjoyed every piece. But were there a couple that stood out? Absolutely. I mean, we were lucky enough in our early years, way before I'd ever thought about working in government or politics, to have Senator Manchin on there. we had John Chambers and Brad Smith, and that was before Brad was the president at Marshall University. And then, towards the end, we were lucky enough to have Charles Wesley Godwin come on and talk about how, he's spreading the West Virginia story across the nation and the world. And John Crook, who grew up in Charleston, and then in the Panhandle in Kaiser. And so, of course, he's a former MLB legend and now the Phillies color commentator. And so, you talk to some of these guys who really don't have to live in West Virginia and are, don't really have to associate themselves with West Virginia if they don't want to, but you hear that they live and breathe West Virginia in whatever facet of life, wherever life's taken them. And so, whether we were talking to somebody that was in, a certain community that lived in West Virginia, of course, that's going to be a little different because they're here. But really, when we started talking to people who were no longer living in West Virginia or were loosely affiliated with the state in some level, but were either from here or had lived here for a long time, that's when it really opened your eyes that, wow, West Virginia had such an impact on somebody's life that even today, they haven't lived here in 30 plus years, but they still think about all of their great childhood memories here, and they rep West Virginia every single day. And so that was, it was really rejuvenating because every single episode that we had, we were trying to get the best out of somebody. We were trying to get the best stories or the best information or just some heartwarming, inspirational feeling out of them, an emotion out of them. And so while, you do it for so long, you're like, oh man, on to the next one, on to the next one. But every single conversation Cooper and I left, we felt very, again, rejuvenated. We felt fresh because we got the best out of somebody. We wanted everybody to look really good, and that was the goal and the intent. And so when you accomplish that, you feel good because you helped bring somebody's story out.
Yeah, and I think you hit an important point as you told that story because you can't tell West Virginia's story without going to a broad spectrum of groups of people, those people who've been there and left and been successful, but also those young leaders like
Yeah.
yourself that are growing the next opportunities for West Virginia. And I tell people all the time, I grew up in the 60s, 70s, and 80s in the Kanawha Valley, and it was the place in the world to grow up. And we've had our challenges in West Virginia, but this is about creating that, not that same thing, but the next set of opportunities for the next generation of West Virginians going forward. So last question I got for you, what did you've done this, you've had a pretty for a young guy, you've had pretty good spectrum of marketing opportunities and selling West Virginia stories in a variety of ways. So what advice do you got for an old guy like me trying to help tell West Virginia's story going forward?
Yeah, well, thank you again for having me on here and kind of let me express myself. And yeah, I think the best advice that I can give anybody, and a little cliche, but it is be yourself because ultimately people want to hear from you. I know that you have guests on here, and maybe that's the hook. Somebody might be coming in through the front door for the guest, but they're staying for James Hoyer. They're staying for General Hoyer too. And so, the more that you do this, the more people are going to hear your voice because you're the only one that's coming back each week, right? It's a different guest, but General Hoyer's here every single day. And so, being yourself, telling your story and really just continuing to represent West Virginia that's the best advice that I can give anybody. Let yourself shine because everybody is unique and different. But everybody's got a great story to tell. And so be yourself, be the most you that anybody else can be, that you can be. And that's the best advice that I can give.
Well, CJ, I greatly appreciate your leadership. You're a bright young West Virginia leader, but I also exceptionally appreciate your enthusiasm and your passion for not only telling West Virginia's story, but making West Virginia a better place. And more folks like you doing it, and West Virginia is going to be in a great place and going to have a great future. And I thank you for joining us at the leadership table today. Thanks for listening. This has been At the Leadership Table with retired Major General Jim Hoyer. Did you know you can now find me on social media at RMG Hoyer? That's HOYER, or email me at rmgjameshoyer@gmail.com.